I married a stranger to save my father's ranch. 3 weeks later, I found 15 love letters he wrote to me, when I didn't even know he existed. If you want to know how a marriage built on desperation became something neither of us expected, stay until the end of this story. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning of my wedding, I woke up to the sound of my father coughing blood into a rag. I stood in the doorway of his bedroom, still in my nightgown, watching him try to hide the stained cloth under his pillow like I hadn't already seen it. The early light coming through the cracked window made everything look worse. The peeling wallpaper, the water stains on the ceiling, the way his hands shook when he finally noticed me standing there. "Clara!" His voice came out rough. "You don't have to do this." I didn't answer right away. What was I supposed to say? That I wanted to marry a man I'd met exactly twice? That I was excited about spending the rest of my life with someone who looked at me like I was a business transaction he was trying to close? "The dress is ready," I said instead. "Mrs. Halloway finished the hem yesterday." Dad pushed himself up against the headboard, wincing. "I mean it, Clara. I'd rather lose this place than watch you throw yourself away on what?" I crossed my arms. "A man willing to pay your debts? A man who's offering us a way out when nobody else would even look at us? A man you don't love." The word hung in the air between us like smoke. Love. As if love had anything to do with survival. As if love paid the bank or kept the ranch hands from walking off or put food in our mouths when the creditors came calling every other week. "I don't need to love him," I said. "I need him to keep his word." My father looked at me with something that might have been pride or might have been grief. I couldn't tell anymore. These days, everything felt like both. "Your mother would have hated this," he said quietly. "Mom's been gone for 8 years. I kept my voice flat. "And she's not here to offer a better solution." I left before he could say anything else. The hallway felt longer than usual, the floorboards creaking under my bare feet. Our house had always been old, but lately it felt like it was actively dying. Windows that wouldn't close all the way, doors that stuck in their frames, the constant smell of damp wood, and something rotting somewhere in the walls. In my room, the wedding dress hung on the back of the door like a ghost. It wasn't white. We couldn't afford white. Mrs. Halloway had pieced it together from an old curtain and some fabric she'd been saving, dyeing it a pale gray that she insisted looked sophisticated. It didn't. It looked like exactly what it was, desperation stitched into something resembling respectability. I got dressed slowly, my fingers clumsy on the buttons. Through the window, I could see the barn where Caleb Mercer had been sleeping for the past week. He'd shown up the day after I accepted his proposal, moved into the empty ranch hand quarters without asking, and immediately started working, fixing fence posts, clearing brush, organizing the tool shed that hadn't been organized in a decade. My father had recognized him somehow. That first evening, when Caleb came up to the house to discuss the arrangement, Dad had stared at him for a long moment before saying, "You worked here before, long time ago." Caleb had nodded. "Yes, sir. 2 summers, when I was 14 and 15. I'd looked between them, confused. "We've had dozens of ranch hands over the years." "Mercer doesn't forget a place," my father had said, and something in his tone made me think he was talking about more than just geography. Now, watching Caleb emerge from the barn in the early morning light, I tried to remember if I'd ever seen him during those summers. But I'd been 13, 14, more interested in books than in the rotation of temporary workers. They'd all blurred together in my memory. Sunburned men who showed up, did their jobs, and disappeared when the season ended. Caleb moved differently than I remembered ranch hands moving, more deliberate, more careful. He stopped to check the latch on the chicken coop, then spent a few minutes examining the porch steps like he was cataloging everything that needed repair. He was 31, same as me. Somehow, that made the whole thing worse. We were both old enough to know better, old enough to recognize this marriage for exactly what it was. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the county clerk's office. No church, no reception, no pretending this was anything other than a legal arrangement. I finished dressing and went downstairs. Dad was already in the kitchen, wearing his one good suit. He'd lost so much weight that the jacket hung off his shoulders like it belonged to someone else. The cancer was eating him from the inside out, and we both knew it. The doctors had given him maybe a year, maybe less. That was the real reason I'd said yes to Caleb's proposal. Not just the ranch, not just the debts, but the fact that my father was dying, and I couldn't bear the thought of him spending his last months watching everything he'd built get sold off piece by piece. "You look beautiful," Dad said, and his eyes were too bright. "I look like someone wearing curtains." "Your mother made those curtains." I hadn't known that. The information settled somewhere in my chest, adding another layer to the weight I was already carrying. We drove to town in the old truck, the one with the passenger door that wouldn't quite close. I had to hold it shut with one hand the whole way, my other hand gripping the seat as we bounced over ruts in the road. Caleb followed behind us on horseback. When I'd asked why he wasn't riding with us, he'd just said, "Didn't seem appropriate." Red Hollow was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business. By the time we pulled up to the clerk's office, there were already people lingering on the sidewalk, pretending they just happened to be passing by. Mrs. Chen from the general store, the Dorset brothers, Sarah Halloway, who'd made my dress and probably wanted to see if it held together. And standing off to the side, arms crossed, an expression sour, was Richard Pemberton, the banker who owned most of the debt on our ranch and half the other properties in the county. He watched me climb out of the truck with the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. "Congratulations, Miss Whitmore," he called out. "Or I suppose it'll be Mrs. Mercer in a few minutes?" I didn't answer. Caleb had dismounted and was tying his horse to the rail. He glanced at Pemberton once, his face completely neutral, then walked past him without saying a word. That seemed to irritate the banker more than an insult would have. Inside, the clerk's office smelled like old paper and floor wax. Judge Morrison was waiting, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd known my family my whole life, had probably hoped I'd marry someone local, someone whose proposal didn't come with a stack of documents outlining debt repayment schedules. "We ready?" Morrison asked, his tone making it clear this was a question with only one acceptable answer. Dad took his place beside me. Caleb stood to my right, close enough that I could smell the soap he'd used that morning. His hands were clean but work roughened, the nails trimmed short. He wore a plain shirt and dark pants, both neat but not new. No suit, no tie. He looked exactly like what he was, a rancher who'd come to finalize a deal. Morrison went through the words quickly. Standard vows. Nothing personal. Nothing romantic. When he got to the part about objections, someone in the back of the room, probably one of the Dorset brothers, coughed in a way that might have been a laugh. "Do you, Clara Jane Whitmore, take this man?" "I do," I said before he could finish. I wanted it over with. Morrison blinked, then turned to Caleb. "And do you?" "I do." Caleb's voice was quiet but steady. He was looking at me when he said it, and for just a second I saw something in his expression that I couldn't identify. Not happiness, not quite sadness. Something else. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Morrison closed his book with more force than necessary. "You may kiss the bride." There was a long, uncomfortable pause. I hadn't thought about this part. We'd discussed the debts, the living arrangements, the division of labor on the ranch. But we hadn't talked about kissing. Caleb leaned in slightly, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he reached out and took my hand. The first time he'd touched me since this whole thing started. His palm was warm and calloused. "Thank you," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Then he let go and stepped back. Morrison looked relieved that it was over. My father looked like he was going to be sick. And Richard Pemberton, still watching from the doorway, was smiling like he'd just won something. We signed the papers in silence. The clerk handed me a marriage certificate that felt like a receipt. Outside, the small crowd had grown. Word traveled fast in Red Hollow, and apparently a wedding, even one like this, was still entertainment. "Congratulations, Mercer," someone called out. "You got yourself a good piece of land." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He helped me into the truck, his hand on my elbow, careful and impersonal, then closed the door before I could do it myself. "I'll see you back at the ranch," he said through the window. Then he untied his horse and rode off before I could answer. The drive home was quiet. Dad kept his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road. I watched the landscape roll by. Dry grass, scraggly mesquite trees, the mountains in the distance looking purple and hazy in the heat. "He's not what I expected," Dad said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone harder, someone more Mercenary. I thought about the way Caleb had thanked me, the gentleness in his voice. Maybe he's just good at hiding it. Maybe. Dad was quiet for a moment. Or maybe he's got his own reasons for doing this. You mean besides getting a ranch for the price of someone else's debts? I mean, I remember him, Clara, from when he worked here. He was a quiet kid, kept to himself. But he was always... Dad trailed off, like he was trying to find the right word. Watchful. Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. Watchful how? The way people are when they're trying to memorize something they think they're going to lose. Before I could ask what that meant, we pulled up to the house. Caleb's horse was already in the corral, and smoke was coming from the chimney. He must have ridden hard to beat us back. When I walked inside, the kitchen was warm. Caleb had started a fire and put coffee on to boil. He stood with his back to me, one hand on the stove, the other hanging loose at his side. "Thought you might want something hot," he said without turning around. "Thank you." He poured 2 cups, set one on the table for me, then took his own and walked toward the door. "You don't have to leave," I said. "It's your house now, too." Caleb paused, his hand on the door frame. Didn't want to assume. Assume what? That you'd want company. There was something careful in the way he said it, like he was giving me an out, like he understood this whole thing was strange and uncomfortable, and neither of us knew exactly how to navigate it. "The coffee's good," I said. "You can stay if you want." So he did. He sat across from me at the table, both hands wrapped around his cup, and we drank in silence while the fire popped and settled in the stove. This was my marriage, this quiet, awkward moment with a man I didn't know. No celebration, no joy, just 2 people who'd made a practical decision and were now trying to figure out what came next. After a while, Caleb stood. "I should check on the fence line near the creek. Post looked loose yesterday." "It's your wedding day," I said, and immediately felt stupid for pointing it out. "Still needs fixing." He left his cup in the sink and walked out. Through the window, I watched him head toward the barn, his stride long and purposeful. A man who didn't know how to be still. Dad came in a few minutes later, moving slowly. The trip to town had exhausted him. "Where's your husband?" The word sounded foreign. Wrong. "Working." "Of course he is." Dad lowered himself into a chair with a grimace. "That man works like he's got something to prove." "He probably does. He just bought a failing ranch and married a woman who can barely stand to look at him." "You could try, you know." "Try what?" "Looking at him, talking to him. He's not a hired hand, Clara. He's your husband." "A husband I married for money," I said. "Let's not pretend this is anything else." Dad was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother and I didn't marry for love either. Did I ever tell you that?" I stared at him. "What?" "Her father owed mine money, gambling debt. My dad said he'd forgive it if she married me." Dad smiled, but it looked sad. "She cried through the whole ceremony. Didn't speak to me for a week after." I didn't know that. Most people don't. Because eventually, we figured it out. Found our way to something real. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "I'm not saying that'll happen with you and Caleb, but I am saying don't close the door before you've even looked inside." I wanted to argue, but I was too tired. Instead, I finished my coffee and went upstairs to change out of the gray curtain dress. My room, our room, technically, though Caleb hadn't moved any of his things in yet, felt smaller than usual. The bed where I'd slept alone for 31 years suddenly seemed like it was taking up too much space. I sat on the edge of it, still wearing the dress, and tried to imagine what would happen when night came. Would Caleb expect to sleep here? Would he stay in the barn? We hadn't discussed it. We hadn't discussed any of the actual mechanics of being married. A knock on the door frame made me jump. Caleb stood in the hallway, holding a small wooden box. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." He shifted his weight. "I brought my things up, didn't want to assume about the sleeping arrangements, but I figured I should at least have my stuff nearby." "You can put it wherever you want." He set the box down just inside the door, like he was testing the waters. Everything he owned apparently fit in that one container. Clothes, probably. Maybe a book or 2. Not much else. "I'll sleep in the chair," he said, nodding toward the old armchair by the window. "If that's all right." "You don't have to." "I want to." He said it firmly. "This whole thing is already strange enough. No need to make it stranger." I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something else. something uncomfortably close to disappointment. Okay, I said. Caleb nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Clara? Yeah? I meant what I said earlier. Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it wasn't what you wanted. It wasn't what either of us wanted. No, he agreed. But it's what we've got. After he left, I changed into regular clothes and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to find tasks that would keep me busy. I cleaned the kitchen, reorganized the pantry, mended a tear in one of the curtains. Normal things. Things that didn't require me to think about the fact that I was now legally bound to a stranger. Caleb worked outside until the sun started to set. I watched him from the window while I prepared dinner, chicken stew from the last of our winter stores. He moved like someone who was used to physical labor, efficient but not rushed. At one point, my father went out to talk to him, and I saw them standing together near the barn, Dad gesturing towards something and Caleb nodding along. They looked comfortable together, natural, like they'd known each other for years instead of days. When I called them in for dinner, they both showed up with clean hands and tired faces. We ate at the kitchen table, the three of us, and it should have felt wrong, this strange new configuration of family, but somehow it didn't. Somehow it just felt quiet. This is good, Caleb said about the stew. It's just chicken and vegetables. Still good. Dad talked a little about the fence repairs, asking Caleb's opinion on whether to replace certain sections or just reinforce them. Caleb answered thoughtfully, laying out the pros and cons of each approach. He didn't talk down to my father or try to take over the conversation. He just participated. After dinner, Caleb insisted on doing the dishes. I tried to argue, but he was already rolling up his sleeves. You cooked, he said. Fair's fair. So I let him. I helped Dad to his room, got him settled for the night, then found myself with nothing to do except go to bed myself. Caleb was still downstairs when I went to our room. True to his word, he'd moved the armchair closer to the window and laid out a blanket and pillow. It looked profoundly uncomfortable. I changed into my nightgown and climbed into bed, leaving the lamp on low. About 20 minutes later, I heard Caleb's footsteps on the stairs. He paused outside the door, then entered quietly, like he was trying not to disturb me. I'm awake, I said. Sorry, I was trying to be quiet. It's fine. He moved around in the semi-darkness, changing into sleep clothes. I kept my eyes on the ceiling, giving him privacy. When he finally settled into the chair, I heard him shift several times, trying to find a position that worked. That can't be comfortable, I said. I've slept in worse places. Still, I'm fine, Clara, really. We were both quiet for a while. Outside, an owl called. The house made its settling noises, creaks and groans that I'd learned to ignore years ago, but that probably sounded strange to Caleb. Can I ask you something? I said into the darkness. Sure. Why did you really come back? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. Then, your father needed help, and I was in a position to give it. But why our ranch specifically? You could have bought land anywhere. Another long pause. I remembered this place. Thought it was worth saving. It wasn't really an answer, but I was too tired to push. Well, thank you for saving it. You already thanked me at the ceremony. I know, but I mean it. Whatever your reasons, you didn't have to do this. Neither did you. I thought about that. I did, though. I couldn't watch my father lose everything he'd worked for. I couldn't watch him die knowing it was all gone. Yeah, Caleb said softly. I understand that. I fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, steady and even from the chair by the window. My husband, this strange, quiet man who fixed fences and did dishes and worked like he was trying to prove something I didn't understand yet. The next morning, I woke to find him already gone. The blanket was folded neatly on the chair, and when I went downstairs, the coffee was already made and the fire already going. Through the window, I saw him out by the barn talking to one of our remaining ranch hands, Tommy Briggs, who'd stayed on despite the fact we could barely pay him. They were looking at something on the ground, both of them crouched down. After a moment, Caleb stood and headed toward the tool shed. This became our pattern. Caleb woke before dawn, made coffee, and started working. I cooked meals. Dad supervised what he could from the porch or the kitchen table. In the evenings, we ate together, and then Caleb slept in the chair while I pretended not to notice how uncomfortable it must be. We were polite to each other. careful, like roommates who'd just met and were still figuring out the boundaries. But there were moments, small, strange moments, when I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, or when I'd find him standing in front of the old portrait of me that hung in the hallway, the one my mother had commissioned when I was 15. He'd stare at it like he was trying to solve a puzzle, then shake his head and walk away. And there was the way my father watched him, with something that looked like recognition, or maybe pity. 2 weeks into the marriage, I decided to clean out the barn. It was something I'd been putting off for months, years maybe. The place was full of junk, broken tools, rotting hay bales, equipment that hadn't worked since before my mother died. I started in the back corner, where we'd stored old furniture. There was a desk that had belonged to my grandfather, missing 2 drawers, a wardrobe with a cracked mirror, boxes of papers that probably should have been thrown out decades ago. I was moving a stack of those boxes when I noticed something odd about the floorboards. One of them looked loose, sitting slightly higher than the others. When I pressed on it with my foot, it shifted. Curious, I knelt down and worked my fingers under the edge. The board came up easily, like it had been removed before. And underneath, in the hollow space between the joists, was a small tin box. It was dusty, but not rusted. Someone had put it there recently, or at least more recently than most of the junk in the barn. I pulled it out and sat back on my heels. The box wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in the same handwriting, all on the same kind of paper. None of them were in envelopes. None of them were addressed. I picked up the first one. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded. At the top it just said, Letter 1. My hands were shaking as I started to read. I saw her again today by the creek. She was reading, like always. I don't think she knows I watch sometimes. I'm careful not to bother her. I just like seeing her happy. She laughed at something in her book, and I wish I could remember that sound forever. I won't ever tell her. What would be the point? I'm just a ranch hand. She's the daughter of the man who employs me. We live in different worlds, but I can write it down. I can keep this secret where nobody will ever find it. See, my heart was beating too fast. I looked at the date scrawled at the bottom, 15 years ago. 15 years ago, I was 16, and Caleb Mercer was a teenage ranch hand working on my father's property. With trembling fingers, I reached for the next letter. I sat on that dusty barn floor for what felt like hours, reading through letters that weren't meant for me. Or maybe they were always meant for me, just not meant to be found. Letter after letter, all signed with that single initial. See, Caleb. Letter 3. She brought water to the workers today. Her hands were shaking when she handed me the cup. I don't think she was nervous, just not used to the work. She smiled, though. Said thank you like she meant it. Most people don't look at ranch hands long enough to mean anything. Letter 7. I heard her father talking about sending her to school in Austin. She wants to study literature. Of course she does. She's always reading. I hope she goes. I hope she gets everything she wants, even if it means I never see her again. Letter 9. Last day tomorrow. I've been trying to work up the courage to talk to her, really talk to her, not just yes ma'am and no ma'am. But what would I say? That I've spent 2 summers memorizing the way she walks? That I know she likes to sit by the creek in the afternoon because the trees give shade? That would make me sound crazy. The handwriting was messy in the early letters, like a kid who was still figuring out how to shape his thoughts into words. But it got steadier as I went on, more controlled. The content stayed the same, though, observations of a girl who had no idea she was being seen. I should have felt violated. Some stranger watching me, cataloging my movements, writing about me like I was something to be studied. But the tone wasn't creepy. It was sad, lonely, like he was trying to hold on to something he knew he'd never actually have. Letter 12. She got into the school. I heard her telling her mother. She was so happy she was crying. I've never seen anyone cry from happiness before. I wanted to tell her congratulations, but I chickened out. Just another coward moment to add to the collection. I remembered that day. I remembered crying in my mother's arms, overwhelmed with relief and excitement. I'd worked so hard for that acceptance letter, and somewhere in the background, a 15-year-old ranch hand had been watching, happy for me, silent. The barn door creaked. I shoved the letters back into the tin box and stood up so fast I got dizzy. Tommy Briggs poked his head in. Mrs. Mercer, you all right? Been in here a while. Mrs. Mercer. The name still didn't feel real. I'm fine. Just sorting through some old things. Tommy looked skeptical but didn't push. Your husband's looking for you, something about the water pump. Tell him I'll be there in a minute. After Tommy left, I looked down at the tin box in my hands. I should put it back. Pretend I never found it. These were private thoughts, never meant to be read. But I didn't put it back. I carried it to the house, hid it in the back of my closet under a stack of old quilts, and went to find Caleb. He was crouched by the water pump near the kitchen, tools spread out around him. His shirt was soaked with sweat, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. When he saw me coming, he stood. Pump's shot, he said. We need to replace the whole mechanism. I can ride into town tomorrow, get the parts. How much will that cost? Don't worry about it. Caleb, I said, don't worry about it. He wiped his hands on his pants. That's part of the deal, remember? I handle the money. You handle... He trailed off like he wasn't sure what my part was supposed to be. I handle what exactly? He looked uncomfortable. I don't know. The house? Your father? I'm still figuring out how this is supposed to work. That makes two of us. We stood there in awkward silence. A chicken wandered past, pecking at the dirt. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, turning everything golden. I saw you in the barn earlier, Caleb said finally. Find anything interesting? My heart jumped. Just old furniture, junk mostly. You were in there a long time for junk. I'm thorough. He studied my face like he was trying to read something there, then nodded. I'll get cleaned up for dinner. I watched him walk toward the barn, his gait slightly uneven like his left leg was bothering him. I'd noticed that before, the way he favored his right side. An old injury maybe, something he'd never mentioned. How much didn't I know about this man? And how much had he known about me before he ever showed up with his proposal? That night, after Dad went to bed, I snuck the tin box out of my closet and took it downstairs. Caleb was outside doing a final check on the animals. Through the window, I could see his silhouette moving in the lamplight from the barn. I sat at the kitchen table and continued reading. Letter 15. I'm not coming back next summer. Dad got me a job up north on a cattle ranch. Better pay, he says. A real opportunity. I should be excited, but all I can think about is that I won't see her anymore. Won't hear her laugh. Won't watch her walk down to the creek with her books. I know this is pathetic. I know I'm pathetic. She doesn't even know my name. But I did know his name now. And I was starting to understand that the quiet man sleeping in a chair every night had been carrying this for half his life. Letter 18. Been gone 6 months. Tried not to think about her. Tried to move on. There was a girl here, Annie, who made it clear she was interested. She's pretty, nice, laughs at my jokes. I took her to dinner twice. I couldn't stop comparing her to Clara. The way she held her fork, the way she pronounced certain words. It wasn't fair to Annie. Wasn't fair to anyone, really, that I'm still hung up on someone who doesn't know I exist. I felt something twist in my chest. Guilt, maybe? Or pity? I couldn't tell. The door opened and I jumped, nearly knocking over my water glass. Caleb stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, me at the table, the tin box open in front of me, letters spread out like evidence. His face went completely white. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Caleb walked slowly to the table and sank into the chair across from me. He didn't reach for the letters, didn't try to hide them or make excuses, just sat there, looking at me with an expression that was equal parts resignation and fear. I should have thrown those away, he said quietly, years ago. I don't know why I kept them. You hid them under the barn floor. I know. When? The day before the wedding. I was going through my things, found them at the bottom of an old trunk, thought about burning them, but he shook his head. I couldn't, so I hid them instead. Stupid. How long have you been writing these? Since I was 14. The first few are pretty rough. I didn't really know what I was doing. There are dozens of them, Caleb. I know. Some of these are from last year. You were still writing them last year. He met my eyes. Yeah, my hands were shaking. I put them in my lap where he couldn't see. You've been watching me for 15 years. Not watching, not like that. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I worked here 2 summers when I was a kid. You were just there, part of the landscape. And then I left and I couldn't stop thinking about you. The letters were, I don't know, a way to process it, I guess, a way to let go. Doesn't look like you let go. No, he admitted. I didn't. We sat in silence. Outside, a coyote called in the distance. The kitchen clock ticked on the wall, each second feeling too loud. Did you marry me because you wanted the ranch? I asked. Or because you wanted me? Caleb looked down at his hands. They were scarred from years of work, calluses on top of calluses. Both, neither. I don't know how to answer that without sounding like either a liar or a creep. Try honesty. He took a breath. When I heard your father was in trouble, my first thought was that I could help, that I could do something useful for once. And yeah, part of me thought, maybe this is my chance. Maybe she'll finally see me. But I didn't come here expecting anything from you. I came here because you needed help, and I was in a position to give it. The marriage was practical. We both agreed on that. But you wanted more, Bob. I wanted you to have a choice, he said carefully. I wanted your father to keep his land. I wanted you to not have to worry about money anymore. What I wanted for myself, that wasn't part of the equation. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. It's just not the answer you're looking for. I picked up one of the letters, letter 23, where he described hearing about my mother's death and wishing he could be there to help carry the weight of it. You wrote about my mother dying. I know. How did you even hear about it? Tommy Briggs. We worked together up north for a while. He mentioned it in passing, didn't realize I knew your family. And you wrote a letter about it. I wrote letters about everything. That's what they were for, processing things I couldn't say out loud. I set the letter down. My anger was fading, replaced by something more complicated. These are beautiful, you know, sad as hell, but beautiful. Caleb looked surprised. I'm not much of a writer. You captured things, real things, the way someone moves, the sound of their voice. That's not nothing. It's also borderline obsessive. Maybe, but it's honest. I gathered the letters into a pile, straightening them. Why didn't you tell me? When you showed up with the proposal, why not just say you knew me before? Because that would have made it worse. Would have made it look like I was using old history to manipulate you. And because, he hesitated, because you didn't remember me. I was nobody to you, just another ranch hand. Telling you I'd been writing letters about you for 15 years would have made you run. He was right about that. If he'd shown up and immediately confessed to carrying a torch since adolescence, I would have sent him packing. Does my father know? I asked. That I wrote letters? No, but he recognized me. Knew I'd worked here before. I think he suspected I had feelings. He's perceptive. He told me you were watchful, back then. I was trying to be invisible. Apparently I wasn't very good at it. I looked at the man sitting across from me. My husband. This stranger who wasn't really a stranger. What happens now? That's up to you, Caleb said. I meant what I said at the wedding. I'm grateful you agreed to this, but I don't expect anything from you that wasn't part of our original arrangement. You want me to burn the letters? I'll burn them. You want me to sleep in the barn instead of your room? I'll do that too. You want an annulment? I don't want an annulment. He looked startled. You don't? We signed a contract. Made promises. My father needs you. The ranch needs you. I paused. And honestly, I don't know what I want yet, but I know I don't want to blow everything up over some old letters. They're not that old. I wrote one last month. Before you came here? Right before. I was trying to decide if I should reach out to your father. I wrote it all down, everything I was thinking. Then I rode to Red Hollow the next day. Can I read it? Caleb hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It's not in the box. I've been carrying it. He handed it over. The paper was worn soft from being folded and unfolded. I opened it carefully. Letter 47. Tomorrow, I'm going to ride to Red Hollow and ask Thomas Whitmore if I can help save his ranch. I'll offer to pay his debts in exchange for a partnership. Maybe marriage, if Clara is willing. I know how this sounds. I know how it looks. But here's the truth. I'm 31 years old and I've built a successful business, and I still can't stop thinking about a girl I met when I was 14. I've tried. I've tried relationships. I've tried focusing on work. I've tried telling myself it was just a childhood crush that I've blown out of proportion. It doesn't go away. So tomorrow, I'm going to do something either very brave or very stupid. I'm going to offer her a way out of her problems. And maybe, probably not, but maybe, she'll let me be part of her life in some small way. If she's happy someday, that'll be enough. Even if I'm nowhere near her, but if there's a chance, even a small one, that we could build something real, I have to try. See, my vision blurred. I blinked hard, trying to clear it. You really mean all this? Every word. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone. I know. That's why I wasn't going to tell you. Was going to let you think this was just a business arrangement. But you found the box, so... He shrugged. Now you know. I read the letter again. The handwriting was the same as the others, but steadier now, more confident. The words of a man who'd made a decision and was following through, even though he knew it might blow up in his face. I need time, I said finally, to process this, to figure out what I'm feeling. Take all the time you need. And I want to keep reading the letters, all of them. Something flickered across his face. They're yours now. Do what you want with them. I might have questions. I'll answer them, honestly. I stood, gathering the letters back into the tin box. Caleb remained seated, watching me with an expression I was starting to recognize, that watchful look my father had mentioned, like he was trying to memorize something he thought he might lose. For what it's worth, I said, I'm glad you came back. His eyes widened slightly. Yeah? Yeah, you've been good for this place, good for my father, and... I hesitated. I'm starting to think you might be good for me too. I just don't know yet. That's fair. I left him sitting at the kitchen table and carried the box upstairs. In our room, I set it on my nightstand where I could see it. Then I changed into my nightgown and climbed into bed. About 20 minutes later, Caleb came up. He moved quietly around the room, getting ready for sleep. When he settled into the chair by the window, I spoke into the darkness. That chair is terrible for your back. I've slept in worse places. You said that before. Where? Bunkhouses mostly, haylofts. Once I slept in a tree because there were coyotes circling and I didn't have a gun. A tree? Not my finest moment. I smiled despite myself. You can sleep in the bed, you know, it's big enough. We can put pillows between us if you want. Long silence. Then, you sure? No, but the chair is ridiculous and you're going to hurt yourself. I heard him stand, heard the rustle of the blanket being folded. Then the mattress dipped as he climbed in on the far side, staying as close to the edge as physically possible. Pillows? He asked. Probably smart. He grabbed 2 pillows from the chair and arranged them down the middle of the bed like a wall. We lay there in the dark on opposite sides of our makeshift barrier, not touching, barely breathing. This is weird, I said. Extremely weird. But better than the chair? Marginally, I laughed. Actually laughed. It surprised both of us. I like that sound, Caleb said quietly. What sound? You laughing. I always liked it. I thought about all those letters, all those observations of moments I hadn't known were being observed. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like someone had been paying attention when I thought no one was looking. Tell me something, I said. Something that's not in the letters. Like what? I don't know. Something real. Something you've never told anyone. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, I'm terrified of horses. I turned my head toward him, even though I couldn't see him in the dark. You ride every day. I know. Doesn't make it less scary. Got kicked in the head when I was 8. Spent 2 weeks seeing double. Ever since then, every time I get on a horse, there's a part of me that's waiting to get kicked again. But you do it anyway. Can't work a ranch if you're afraid of horses. So I pretend I'm not. I thought about that. About all the things we pretend not to be afraid of. I'm terrified of being alone, I said. Always have been. It's why I stayed here instead of going to Austin for school. Why I took care of my mother when she got sick instead of hiring help. Why I'm still here taking care of my father, even though he told me to go live my own life. You're not alone now. No, I agreed. I'm not. We talked for another hour, trading small confessions in the darkness. He told me about the cattle ranch up north, about the men he'd worked with, about a winter storm that killed half their herd. I told him about my mother's last days, about the way the house felt empty after she died, about dropping out of school and coming back to Red Hollow. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep to the sound of his voice, and when I woke in the early morning light, the pillow wall had collapsed during the night, and Caleb's hand was resting on top of mine. He woke when I moved, pulled his hand back quickly. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's fine." He sat up, running a hand through his hair. It stuck up in different directions, making him look younger. "I should get started on the day." "Caleb?" He paused, halfway out of bed. "Thank you for being honest about the letters, for not making excuses." "Didn't have much choice, did I? You found them." "You could have lied, said they were someone else's, said you were just keeping them for a friend." "I'm a lot of things, Clara, but I'm not a liar." After he left, I got dressed and went downstairs. Dad was already up, sitting at the table with his coffee. He looked tired, but alert. "Morning," he said. "Sleep okay?" "Actually, yeah. You?" "Well enough." He studied my face. "Something's different." "What do you mean?" "You look, I don't know, less angry maybe?" I poured myself coffee and sat across from him. "I found something yesterday, in the barn." "The letters?" I nearly dropped my cup. "You knew about the letters?" I suspected. Caleb had that look about him when he showed up. Same look he had as a kid whenever you were around, like he was trying to solve a math problem he couldn't quite work out. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Wasn't my place. Whatever's between you two, that's for you to figure out." Dad took a sip of his coffee. "He's a good man, Clara, better than most. And he didn't come here to take advantage of you. He came here because he cares. Maybe too much, but that's not the worst problem to have." "He's been writing about me for 15 years, Dad. That's not normal." "No, it's not. But it's honest. And honestly, I'd rather you be with someone who cares too much than someone who doesn't care at all." Before I could respond, Caleb came in from outside, saw us talking, and immediately turned around. "Don't leave on my account," Dad called after him. "We're not talking about you." "Yes, we are," I said. Caleb stopped, looking uncomfortable. "I can come back." "Sit down," Dad ordered. "All this tiptoeing around is getting ridiculous. We're married now, Clara, whether we like it or not. Might as well act like it." Caleb sat cautiously, like he expected the chair to be rigged. I poured him coffee and slid it across the table. "Your wife found your letters," Dad said bluntly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I know." "And you told her the truth about them?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Lying would have been stupid, and you're not a stupid man." Dad looked between us. "Now here's what's going to happen. You two are going to figure out if this marriage is going to be real or just a piece of paper. And you're going to do it honestly, without all this dancing around each other. Clear?" "Dad, clear?" he repeated, looking at Caleb. "Clear," Caleb said quietly. Dad stood, moving slowly. "I'm going to sit on the porch for a while. You two talk." He grabbed his coffee and walked out, leaving us alone. Caleb and I stared at each other across the table. "He's not subtle, is he?" Caleb said finally. "Never has been." "What do you want to talk about?" I thought about the letters, about the man who'd written them, about the fact that I'd spent the last 2 weeks living with someone who knew me better than I knew him. "Everything," I said. "I want to know everything." So he told me. About watching me read by the creek, about learning which books were my favorites by glimpsing the covers, about the summer I turned 16 and how he'd convinced himself he was going to talk to me before the season ended, about chickening out every single time. I told him what I remembered from those summers, which wasn't much. I'd been so wrapped up in my own world, books and dreams of leaving Red Hollow, that I'd barely noticed the workers. I told him I was sorry for that, for being so oblivious. "Don't apologize," he said. "You were 16. You were supposed to be wrapped up in your own world. I was the one being weird. You were 14 and you had a crush. That's not weird. It is when it lasts 15 years. Maybe, or maybe it's just—" I searched for the right word. "Persistent." He smiled slightly. "That's a generous way to put it." We talked until lunch, then through lunch, then into the afternoon. Dad came and went, making pointed comments about young people wasting daylight hours. Tommy stopped by with questions about the fence line and looked startled to find us both sitting idle. For the first time since the wedding, maybe for the first time since Caleb showed up with his proposal, we weren't performing our roles. We were just talking, being honest, figuring each other out. And somewhere in the middle of that long conversation, I realized I was starting to like him. Not love. That was too big, too fast. But he was funny when he let himself be, smart about things I'd never considered, patient with my questions, even the uncomfortable ones. By evening, when we finally stood up to start dinner, something had shifted. We moved around the kitchen together more easily, passing ingredients, coordinating tasks without having to discuss who would do what. "This is nice," I said, chopping vegetables. "What is?" "This. Cooking together, talking, not feeling like we're walking on eggshells." Caleb nodded. "Yeah, it is." That night, we didn't bother with the pillow wall. We just climbed into bed on our respective sides and lay there in the comfortable darkness. "Clara," Caleb said after a while. "Yeah? I'm glad you found the letters. Even though they embarrass you? Even though. At least now everything's out in the open. No more secrets." I thought about that, about how secrets have weight, how carrying them around makes everything harder. "No more secrets," I agreed. I fell asleep easier that night, and when I woke the next morning, Caleb was still beside me, his breathing steady and even. The stranger I'd married was becoming less strange, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, we might actually figure out how to make this work. 3 weeks after I found the letters, Richard Pemberton showed up at our door with a smile that made my skin crawl and a leather folder tucked under his arm. I was in the kitchen washing breakfast dishes when I saw his automobile pull up the drive, dust rising behind it like smoke. Caleb was out fixing the irrigation ditch with Tommy. Dad was resting upstairs. I dried my hands on my apron and went to the door before Pemberton could knock. "Mr. Pemberton?" I didn't invite him in. "Mrs. Mercer?" He tipped his hat, still smiling. "Beautiful morning, isn't it? What do you want?" Now, is that any way to greet an old family friend? You're not a friend. You're a banker who tried to take our land. His smile tightened. "Tried? My dear, I still can. That's actually why I'm here." He held up the leather folder. "May I come in? This is a conversation best had sitting down." Everything in me wanted to slam the door in his face, but the folder worried me. 5 minutes. I let him into the kitchen but didn't offer coffee. He sat at the table anyway, making himself comfortable, setting the folder down with deliberate care. "Your father signed some papers a few years back," Pemberton said, opening the folder. "Additional loans to cover operating costs. At the time, the term seemed reasonable." "Get to the point." "The point, Mrs. Mercer, is that buried in those terms, which I'm sure your father read very carefully, is a clause about compound interest on any unpaid balance after the first year. The interest rate is quite high, 30% to be exact." My stomach dropped. "That's illegal." "It's not, actually. Usurious, perhaps, but not illegal. Your father signed acknowledging the terms." He pulled out a document, slid it across the table. I recognized Dad's signature at the bottom. "This is fraud. He would never have agreed to 30%. And yet his signature says otherwise. The original loan was $5,000. With compound interest over 3 years, the current balance is just over $11,000. Pemberton leaned back in his chair. "Your new husband paid off the original $5,000. I'm here to collect the rest." "We don't have $11,000. "I know, which is why I'm prepared to be generous." His smile widened. "I'll forgive the debt entirely in exchange for the water rights to Red Creek. It runs through your property, but it also runs through mine. Control both sides, and I control access for half the county." "Go to hell. You have 10 days to deliver payment in full. Otherwise, I'll have the sheriff auction off everything that's not nailed down. Cattle, equipment, the house itself if necessary." He stood, smoothing his jacket. "Or you can sign over the water rights and we'll call it even. Get out." 10 days, Mrs. Mercer. Think carefully." After he left, I stood in the kitchen shaking with rage. The document was still on the table, my father's signature mocking me from the bottom of the page. I heard Caleb's voice outside, talking to Tommy, and I went to the door. "Caleb, inside, now!" He took one look at my face and came running. Tommy followed, saw my expression, and wisely stayed on the porch. "What happened?" Caleb asked. I handed him the document, watched his face darken as he read. By the time he finished, his jaw was so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "When did Pemberton leave?" 2 minutes ago. I'm going after him." "And do what? Hit him? That won't change the contract." "Maybe not, but it'll make me feel better." He read through the document again, slower this time. "This is a trap. He knew these terms would be impossible to meet. He's been planning this from the start. Can we fight it? Maybe. If we had a lawyer in 6 months, we don't have either." He set the paper down. "We need $11,000 in 10 days or he takes the water rights. Or everything else we own." We stared at each other across the table. This was supposed to be over. Caleb had paid the debts, married me, saved the ranch. We were supposed to be safe. "I have about $3,000 in the bank," Caleb said. "My business up north is doing okay, but most of the assets are tied up in property and cattle. I could sell, but not in 10 days. We have maybe $200 in our account. Dad's medical bills took most of our savings." "What about the cattle here? How many head?" 43. Half of them too old or sick to sell for much." Caleb did the math in his head. "Even if we got top price, we'd be lucky to clear 4,000. That leaves us 4,000 short." I sank into a chair. "So we're back where we started. Worse, actually, because now we're married to each other and still losing everything." "Hey." Caleb crouched down in front of me, taking my hands. "We're not losing anything. I just need to think." "There's nothing to think about. We don't have the money. We can't get the money. Pemberton wins." "No, there's always a way." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. Dad appeared in the doorway, leaning on the frame. "What's going on?" I explained. Watched the color drain from his face as he understood what he'd signed, what he'd done. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I was desperate. They said it was standard language. I believed them." "This isn't your fault," Caleb said. "The hell it isn't. I signed away our lives because I was too proud to ask for help sooner." Dad moved to the table, lowered himself carefully into a chair. "The water rights. If Pemberton controls both sides of the creek, he controls every ranch downstream. He'll charge whatever he wants for access." "I know. Half the county will go under within a year." "I know." Dad looked at me, then at Caleb. "There's no way to raise that kind of money in 10 days. Not legally." "So what do we do?" I asked. No one had an answer. That night, Caleb didn't come to bed. I found him in the barn after midnight, sitting on a hay bale with a lamp burning beside him and papers spread across his lap. He looked exhausted. "Come to bed," I said. "Can't. I'm trying to work something out." "What?" "I know people. Ranchers I've helped over the years. If I can convince enough of them to lend us money, promise to pay them back with interest, we might be able to piece together the 11,000. In 10 days? It's possible. Most of them are scattered across 3 counties, but if I ride hard, I can cover the territory. Tommy knows some of them too. He can take half the list. And if they say no? They won't. They owe me." But he didn't sound convinced. I sat down next to him on the hay bale. "This wasn't supposed to happen. You paid the debts. You did everything right. Pemberton's smart. He waited until we felt safe. You think he planned this from the beginning? Let you pay off the obvious debts just to hit us with the hidden one? I think he's been trying to consolidate power in this county for years, and our ranch is the key piece he needs." Caleb rubbed his face. "I should have read the fine print more carefully, should have insisted on seeing every document your father ever signed. You're not a lawyer. You couldn't have known." "I should have known anyway." We sat in silence. The barn was warm, smelling of hay and leather and the sharp scent of the kerosene lamp. Outside, a horse nickered softly. "What if we can't raise the money?" I asked. "Then we lose the water rights and probably everything else when Pemberton comes after us for something else he buried in the contracts. There has to be another way." "Like what? Rob a bank?" He meant it as a joke, but neither of us laughed. "We could leave," I said quietly. "Take Dad and go north. Start over somewhere else. And let Pemberton win? Let him destroy half the county? It's not our responsibility to save the county." "No, but it's my responsibility to protect you. I promised your father. I promised you." He looked at me, and in the lamplight his eyes were fierce. I'm not running, and I'm not letting that bastard take what's yours. Something in his tone made my chest tight. Ours, I said. What? What's ours? We're married, remember? Your fight is my fight. Caleb's expression softened. Yeah, we are. He started riding out at dawn the next morning, took the list of names he'd compiled and headed north toward the first ranch. I wanted to go with him, but someone needed to stay with Dad, who was getting weaker by the day. His coughing had gotten worse, bringing up more blood. The doctor said it wouldn't be long now, weeks, maybe. A month, if we were lucky. So I stayed, ran the ranch with Tommy's help, fed the chickens, collected eggs, tried to keep everything running while Caleb chased money across 3 counties. He came back 3 days later looking like hell. Exhausted and covered in trail dust, his horse lathered and trembling. How much? I asked, meeting him at the barn. 2,000. Maybe 2,500 if the last guy comes through with what he promised. That's not enough. I know. Tommy got another 800. We're still 5,000 short. He dismounted slowly, like every muscle hurt. I'm going back out tomorrow. There are a few more people I can try. Caleb, you can't keep doing this. You're going to kill yourself. What choice do I have? Let me come with you. We can cover more ground together. What about your father? Mrs. Halloway can sit with him. She offered yesterday when I told her what was happening. Caleb looked at me for a long moment. You sure? We're in this together, remember? We left the next morning before sunrise. Caleb had mapped out a route that would take us to 4 ranches in 2 days. The first was owned by a man named Davis, who'd worked with Caleb 5 years ago on a cattle drive. He owes me, Caleb said as we rode. I pulled him out of a river during a storm, saved his life. And you think he'll give us money for that? I'm hoping he'll at least try. Davis lived alone in a small house with a sagging roof and fences that needed mending. He came out when he heard our horses squinting against the morning sun. Caleb Mercer, thought you were dead. Not yet. Need a favor, Davis. We explained the situation, watched Davis's expression go from curious to sympathetic to apologetic. I wish I could help, he said, but I'm barely keeping my own place running. Had a bad winter. Lost most of my herd to disease. Anything you can spare would help. Davis went inside, came back with a small leather pouch. $60. It's all I've got until I sell my spring calves. Caleb took it. Thank you. I owe you my life. Wish it was worth more than $60. The second ranch went the same way. A widow named Chen, who Caleb had helped fix her barn the year before. She gave us $40 and an apology. The third ranch belonged to a cattle baron named Harrison, who owned half the northern county. When we explained what we needed, he laughed. $11,000? For what, Mercer? So you can play hero to some dying ranch? So I can protect my wife's property from a corrupt banker, Caleb said evenly. Your wife. Harrison looked me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. Heard you married the Whitmore girl. Convenient timing. Watch yourself, Harrison. Or what? You'll challenge me to a duel? Harrison spat tobacco juice into the dirt. I'm a businessman, Mercer. I don't lend money to lost causes. The Whitmore Ranch has been dying for years. Let it die with dignity. Caleb's hand moved toward his belt. I grabbed his arm before he could do something stupid. We should go, I said quietly. We rode away in silence. I could feel Caleb's rage radiating off him like heat. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? For not being able to fix this. For dragging you into something I can't solve. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this. You chose this because you had no other choice. Maybe at first, but now... I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Caleb glanced at me. Now what? Now I'm choosing to stay, because I want to. Because you're... I struggled to find the words. Because you're a good man, and this is my fight as much as yours. Something shifted in his expression. Clara? Don't say anything. I urged my horse faster. Let's just get to the next ranch. The fourth ranch was the last one on our list. A family operation run by brothers named Martinez who'd worked with Caleb years ago. They listened to our story, exchanged glances, and one of them disappeared into the house. He came back with a metal box. We've got 800. It's our savings, but we can spare it for a few months if you pay us back by winter. You'll have it back by fall, Caleb promised. We know. You're good for it. The brother handed over the money. Pemberton's been circling our land too. If he gets control of that creek, we're next. So this isn't charity, it's self-preservation. We rode home that night with just under $4,000 total. Still $7,000 short, 6 days left. It's not enough, I said as we unsaddled the horses. I know. So what do we do? Caleb didn't answer. He finished with his horse, hung the saddle on its rack, and stood there staring at nothing. There is one option, he said finally. What? I could sell my business up north. The whole thing. Land, cattle, buildings. It's worth about $20,000 if I can find the right buyer. In 6 days? I know a man who's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. He'd jump at the chance, but Caleb hesitated. But what? But it's everything I built. 15 years of work. And if I sell, we're betting everything on this ranch. If something else goes wrong, if Pemberton finds another trap we don't know about, we'll have nothing left. I understood what he was saying. This wasn't just about money. It was about giving up his safety net, his independence, everything he'd accomplished before he came back to Red Hollow. You don't have to do that, I said. Yes, I do, because the alternative is losing you. He said it so quietly I almost didn't hear. And I can't. I won't. Caleb, I mean it. I didn't come back here to save a ranch. I came back for you. And if saving you means selling everything else I own, then that's what I'll do. My throat felt tight. What if it's not enough? What if we lose anyway? Then at least we'll lose together. He left the next morning to ride north. Said it would take him 3 days to get there, 1 day to finalize the sale, and 2 days to get back with the money, 6 days total, cutting it impossibly close to Pemberton's deadline. What if something goes wrong? I asked as he saddled his horse. Then Tommy rides after me with word, and I ride back faster. What if you can't make the sale? I'll make it. Jennings has been waiting for this opportunity for years. He'll have the cash ready. What if... Caleb cut me off by pulling me into his arms. It was the first time he'd held me like that, tight and close, so like he was trying to memorize how I felt. I'll be back in time, Chunt, he said into my hair. I promise. Then he was gone, riding hard toward the horizon. Dad and I watched him disappear. Then Dad coughed, a wet rattling sound, and I helped him back inside. He was having a bad day, weak and disoriented. Mrs. Halloway came to sit with him while I tried to keep the ranch running. Tommy and I worked from dawn until dark, feeding animals and checking fences and doing all the tasks that usually fell to Caleb. At night, I fell into bed exhausted and lay awake worrying. About Caleb on the road, about Pemberton's deadline, about my father dying before any of this got resolved. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in. Hard rain that turned the roads to mud and made travel dangerous. I stood at the window watching lightning split the sky and thought about Caleb somewhere out there in it. He'll be fine, Dad said from his chair. He'd insisted on coming downstairs, said he was tired of being treated like an invalid. That man survived worse than a little rain. It's not a little rain, it's a flood. He'll be fine, Dad repeated. He didn't wait 15 years for you just to get himself killed in a storm. The rain lasted 2 days. By the time it stopped, Pemberton's deadline was 4 days away, and Caleb still wasn't back. Tommy tried to be encouraging. Roads are bad. He probably had to hole up somewhere and wait it out. Or he's hurt, or stuck, or he's fine and just delayed. Don't borrow trouble. But trouble found us anyway. On the 7th day, with 3 days left until the deadline, Richard Pemberton showed up again. This time, he brought the sheriff. Mrs. Mercer, Pemberton said, tipping his hat. Just checking in, making sure you're aware the deadline is approaching. I'm aware. And you have the funds ready? My husband is bringing them. Is he now? Where is Mr. Mercer? Handling business. Pemberton smiled. I see. And when do you expect him back? Soon. How soon? I didn't answer. The sheriff, a tired-looking man named Garrett, shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Mercer, I'm just here to serve notice, Garrett said. If payment isn't delivered by noon 3 days from now, Mr. Pemberton has the legal right to seize assets equal to the debt. I understand. Do you? Pemberton stepped closer. Because I'm getting the sense you don't actually have the money, that your husband took off and isn't coming back. He's coming back. You seem very certain for a woman whose husband abandoned her. He didn't abandon me. No? Then where is he? I wanted to hit him, wanted to scream. Instead, I kept my voice level. He's handling business. He'll be back before the deadline. Pemberton studied my face, looking for cracks. For your sake, I hope you're right. Because if he's not back in time, I'm taking everything. The water rights, the cattle, the house. All of it. After they left, I went to the barn and threw things. Old tools, broken equipment, anything I could lift. Let the rage and fear pour out until my arms ached and my hands were bleeding from where I'd grabbed something sharp without noticing. Tommy found me sitting in the dirt, crying. He's coming back, Tommy said. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. I've known Caleb Mercer for 8 years. He's the most stubborn, persistent son of a bitch I've ever met. If he said he's coming back, he's coming back. What if he can't? What if something happened to him? Then we figure out plan B. There is no plan B. Then we figure out plan C. Tommy held out his hand, pulled me to my feet. But we don't give up, not yet. The 8th day passed, then the 9th. On the morning of the 10th day, the day of the deadline, there was still no sign of Caleb. I stood on the porch at dawn, watching the road. Dad sat beside me in his chair, wrapped in blankets despite the warm morning. He'll make it, Dad said. It's already morning. He has until noon. That's only 6 hours. He'll make it. Dad? Clara. He reached over and took my hand. That man rode 3 days through a storm to sell everything he owned for you. He's coming back. Unless he can't. Even if he can't, he'll try. That's the kind of man he is. We sat there watching the empty road. Tommy joined us around 8, looking grim. Mrs. Halloway showed up around 9 with food nobody wanted to eat. At 10 o'clock, Pemberton arrived with Sheriff Garrett and 2 men I didn't recognize. They had a wagon with them. But 2 hours, Mrs. Mercer, Pemberton said cheerfully. I brought help to expedite the asset seizure. Once the deadline passes, we'll start with the cattle. He's coming. I'm sure he is. But the deadline is the deadline. At 11, I saw dust on the horizon. My heart jumped into my throat. Someone's coming, Tommy said. We all stood watching the dust cloud grow closer, a single rider pushing his horse hard. Is that him? Mrs. Halloway asked. I couldn't tell yet. The rider was still too far away. But then he got closer and I saw the horse, Caleb's bay gelding, the one he'd ridden when he left. It's him, I breathed. Caleb rode into the yard at full gallop, pulling up hard in front of the porch. His horse was lathered and trembling. Caleb himself looked like he'd been through hell, covered in mud, soaking wet, exhausted. He dismounted, nearly fell, caught himself on the porch railing. Then he pulled a leather satchel from his saddle and held it out to Pemberton. $11,000, he said, his voice rough. Count it. Pemberton's smile faltered. He took the satchel, opened it, and started counting. We all watched in silence. The only sound was the rustle of bills and Caleb's labored breathing. Finally, Pemberton looked up. It's all here. Then we're done. Where did you get this kind of money? None of your business. The debt's paid. Get off our property. Pemberton handed the satchel to one of his men, then pulled out the contract and a pen. Sign here acknowledging full payment. Caleb signed without reading. Pemberton countersigned, then handed over a receipt. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Mercer. Pemberton climbed into his wagon. Though I have to say, I'm disappointed. I was looking forward to owning that creek. I'm sure you were. Now leave. After Pemberton and his men left, Caleb sagged against the porch railing. I rushed to him, helped him stay upright. You made it, I said stupidly. Barely. Jennings tried to renegotiate at the last minute. Took me an extra day to get him to honor the original price. Then the roads were completely washed out. Had to go 30 miles out of my way to find a crossing. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. But I made it. You sold everything. Yeah. Your business? Your land? Everything you built? Yeah. I kissed him. Right there on the porch in front of my father and Tommy and Mrs. Halloway. Kissed him hard, tasting mud and sweat, and the promise he'd kept. When I pulled back, Caleb was staring at me in shock. "What was that for?" he asked. "For coming back," I said. "For keeping your promise. For being exactly who you said you were. You're everything." And I meant it. Caleb slept for 16 hours straight. I sat beside the bed for most of it, watching him breathe, unable to shake the image of him riding in covered in mud with that leather satchel clutched to his chest. He'd sold everything he owned. For me. For us. For a ranch that wasn't even his by blood. When he finally woke, it was late afternoon and the room was filled with orange light. He blinked up at the ceiling, disoriented, then turned his head and saw me. "How long was I out?" "Almost a full day." "Your father is fine. Mrs. Halloway's with him." I handed him a glass of water. "How do you feel?" "Like I got kicked by a horse and dragged through a river." He pushed himself up, wincing. "But alive." "You almost didn't make it." "Almost doesn't count." He drank half the water in one go. "Is Pemberton really gone?" "Really gone. The debt's cleared. He can't touch us." Caleb set the glass down and rubbed his face. In the afternoon light, I could see just how exhausted he looked. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, shadows under them that spoke of days without real sleep. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. My stomach tightened. "Okay." When Jennings tried to renegotiate, he wanted to drop the price to $15,000. Said the property wasn't worth what we'd agreed on originally. I could have taken it. 15 would have been enough to pay Pemberton with some left over. But I held out for 20 because I wanted you to have a buffer. Something in case Pemberton comes after us again. "Did you get 20? 18. It was the best I could do without losing another day to negotiation. After paying Pemberton, we have 7,000 left." He looked at me. "It's yours. All of it. I'm putting it in an account in your name." "Our name? We're married." "Clara, no, listen to me." I took his hand. "You sold everything you had. I'm not taking that money and putting it in my name like you're some kind of employee. We're partners. That was the deal. The deal was that I'd help save your ranch. And you did. You saved it twice now, but this stopped being just my ranch the day you married me. It's ours. The money is ours. Everything is ours." Caleb stared at me for a long moment. "When did that happen?" "When did what happen?" "When did you start thinking of it as ours instead of yours?" I thought about it. "I don't know exactly. Somewhere between finding the letters and watching you ride off to sell your entire life for people you barely know. Somewhere in there, it stopped being a business arrangement and started being real." "Real," he repeated, like he was testing the word. "Yeah, real. As in, I actually care what happens to you. As in, I actually want this marriage to work. As in," I took a breath. "As in, I'm starting to have feelings for you that weren't part of the original contract." His hand tightened on mine. "What kind of feelings?" "The complicated kind. The kind where I missed you every day you were gone. The kind where I stood on that porch at dawn watching for you because I couldn't stand the thought of you not coming back. The kind where..." He kissed me. Not gentle like I'd kissed him on the porch, but desperate. Like he'd been holding back for weeks and couldn't anymore. I kissed him back just as hard, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "I've wanted to do that since the day I met you," Caleb said. "The real you, not the girl by the creek. You. The woman who threatened Pemberton and threw tools in the barn and kissed me on the porch in front of the whole town." "That wasn't the whole town, just Tommy and Mrs. Halloway." "Might as well be the whole town. Mrs. Halloway tells everyone everything." He brushed his thumb across my cheek. "Are we really doing this? Making this marriage real?" "I think we already did. We just didn't notice until now." We stayed like that for a while, foreheads pressed together, hands clasped. Outside, I could hear Tommy calling to the cattle, the normal sounds of the ranch continuing like the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. Eventually, Caleb stood, stretched, and looked around. "I should check on the animals, see what I missed while I was gone." "Tommy's got it covered. You should rest." "I've been resting for 16 hours. I need to move or I'm going to seize up completely." I followed him downstairs. Dad was in the kitchen with Mrs. Halloway, both of them drinking coffee. Dad looked better than he had in days, more alert, sitting straighter. "There he is," Dad said. "The hero of Red Hollow." Caleb grimaced. I'm not a hero. I just paid a debt. You sold everything you own to pay my debt. That makes you either a hero or an idiot, and I'm choosing to believe hero. I vote idiot, Caleb said, but he was smiling. Mrs. Halloway stood, gathering her things. I should get going. My husband will wonder where I've been. She patted my arm on her way out. You've got yourself a good man, Clara. Don't let him forget it. After she left, the three of us sat around the table. Dad looked between me and Caleb, a knowing expression on his face. Something's different, he said. What do you mean? I tried to sound innocent. You're sitting closer, looking at each other different. Something happened. Dad, about damn time, he said. I was starting to think you two would dance around each other forever. Caleb laughed. We're not that bad. You slept in a chair for 3 weeks rather than share a bed with your own wife. You were that bad. Fair point. We talked through dinner, the conversation easy in a way it hadn't been before. Dad told stories about my mother, about their early years when they were still figuring out how to be married. Caleb talked about the cattle business up north, about the men he'd worked with, about what he'd given up to come back here. Do you regret it? I asked. Selling everything? Caleb thought about it. Ask me again in a year. Right now I'm too tired to regret anything. That's not an answer. No, it's not. But it's honest. After dinner, Dad went to bed early. The ride to town for his weekly doctor's appointment had exhausted him. Caleb and I cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in comfortable silence. I need to go into town tomorrow, Caleb said as he dried the last plate. Set up that account for the money. Make sure everything with Pemberton is properly filed. You want to come? I should stay with Dad. Mrs. Halloway said she'd come by. And honestly, I think he'd appreciate the break from us hovering. We don't hover. Clara, you checked his breathing 3 times during dinner. He was coughing. He's always coughing. He's dying. We all know it. At some point, we have to let him have some dignity instead of treating him like he's going to collapse any second. The words stung, but only because they were true. Fine. I'll come with you. We rode to Red Hollow the next morning, taking the wagon instead of horses. The roads had dried enough to be passable, though there were still sections where we had to go slow to avoid getting stuck in mud. The town was quiet when we arrived. A few people on the sidewalks, some kids playing in front of the general store. We went to the bank first. Not Pemberton's bank, but the smaller one on the east side of town run by a man named Walsh, who'd always been fair with us. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, Walsh said, standing when we entered his office. I heard about your trouble with Pemberton. Glad you were able to settle it. Barely, Caleb said. But yeah, we need to set up a new account, joint account for me and my wife. Of course, let me get the paperwork. While Walsh busied himself with forms, I looked around the small office. There were photographs on the wall. Walsh with various town dignitaries, Walsh at the opening of the bank, Walsh shaking hands with what looked like a state senator. You know Pemberton tried the same thing with me, Walsh said, setting papers in front of us. About 5 years ago, hidden clauses, impossible interest rates. I refused to do business with him after that. That's when he opened his own bank. Why didn't anyone warn us? I asked. Some people tried. Your father was proud, though. Didn't want to admit he needed help until it was almost too late. Walsh slid a pen across the desk. I'm just glad you found a way through it. We filled out the paperwork, deposited the $7,000, and left with a receipt and a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. The ranch was secure. The debts were paid. We actually had money in the bank. Let's celebrate, Caleb said as we stepped out onto the sidewalk. Celebrate how? I don't know. Buy something completely impractical. Have lunch somewhere that's not our kitchen. Act like normal married people for a few hours. We ended up at the general store, wandering the aisles like we had all the time in the world. I bought fabric for new curtains, real fabric, not repurposed scraps. Caleb bought tools he didn't strictly need but had been wanting. We were looking at books when Sarah Halloway found us. Clara Mercer, you are the talk of the town, she said, grinning. Why? What did Mrs. Halloway say? Just that you kissed your husband in front of half the county when he came riding in like some kind of storybook hero. Is it true he sold everything he owned to save your ranch? Sarah, because that is the most romantic thing I've ever heard. Also slightly insane, but mostly romantic. Caleb had wandered over to the hardware section, either to give us privacy or to escape the gossip. Sarah lowered her voice. Seriously, though, are you happy? Because when you first told me about the marriage, you looked like you were going to your own funeral. I was scared. It was all happening so fast. And now? I glanced at Caleb, who was examining a set of wrenches with the concentration of someone trying very hard to look busy. Now I'm still scared, but for different reasons. Like what? Like what if this doesn't work? What if we're building something on a foundation that's not strong enough? What if... Clara. Sarah put her hand on my arm. You're overthinking it. He sold everything he had for you. You kissed him in public. Those aren't the actions of people who are going to fall apart. Those are the actions of people who are already falling together. Falling together, is that a thing? It is now. I just made it up. She squeezed my arm. Be happy. You deserve it. We had lunch at the hotel restaurant, sitting by the window and watching people walk by. It felt strange and wonderful, being out in public as a married couple, not having to explain ourselves or justify the arrangement. People are staring, I said quietly. Let them stare. We're not doing anything wrong. They probably think we're crazy, getting married the way we did. Probably, but we paid off an $11,000 debt in less than 2 weeks. I'd say that makes us less crazy and more desperate with good follow-through. I laughed. Actually laughed, loud enough that people at the next table looked over. On the ride home, we took our time, the wagon rolling slowly along the rutted road. Caleb had his arm along the back of the seat, not quite touching me, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. Thank you, I said. For what? For today. For making me feel normal for a few hours. You are normal. I'm married to a man I barely knew 2 months ago who sold his entire life for me. That's not normal. Maybe not, but it's ours. When we got home, Tommy met us at the barn with a grim expression. Your father's asking for both of you, he said. Doctor came by while you were gone, said it's getting close. The good feeling from the day evaporated instantly. We went inside and found Dad in bed, propped up on pillows, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The doctor was packing up his bag. Few days, the doctor said quietly to me. Maybe a week if he's stubborn. Keep him comfortable. That's all you can do now. After the doctor left, I sat on one side of Dad's bed and Caleb sat on the other. Dad looked at us with eyes that were still sharp despite the pain. Stop dancing around each other, did you? He asked. Yeah, I said. We did. Good. Took you long enough. He coughed, a wet sound that made my chest hurt. Caleb, come here. Caleb leaned closer. Dad reached out and gripped his hand with surprising strength. You take care of her, Dad said. And not just the ranch, her. Make sure she's happy. Make sure she knows she's loved. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Because if you don't, I'll haunt you. I'll make every horse you ride ornery and every fence you fix fall down and every... Dad, I interrupted. He gets it. I'm serious. I'm trusting you with the most important thing in my life. Don't make me regret it. You won't, Caleb said, his voice rough. I promise. Dad turned to me. And you, stop being so scared of being happy. Your mother would have liked him. She would have liked what you two are building. How do you know? Because he's exactly the kind of stubborn fool she would have respected. Someone who doesn't give up. Someone who fights for what matters. He closed his eyes, exhausted from the effort of speaking. Now both of you get out. I'm tired and you're hovering again. We left him to rest. That night, Caleb and I lay in bed not talking, just holding hands in the dark. Tomorrow we'd have to face the reality of Dad dying. Tomorrow we'd have to figure out how to run the ranch without his guidance. Tomorrow we'd have to be strong. But tonight, we just held on to each other. Dad lasted another week. 7 days where he drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and sometimes lost in memories we couldn't follow. Caleb and I took turns sitting with him, making sure he was never alone. On the last day, he was clear-headed for about an hour. Enough time to tell me he loved me, to tell Caleb to fix the fence by the south pasture, to make jokes about finally getting some peace and quiet. Then he closed his eyes and didn't open them again. He died just after sunset, with me holding one hand and Caleb holding the other. The end was quiet, just a few rattling breaths and then stillness. I'd thought I was prepared for it. I'd had months to get ready, but nothing prepares you for the moment your last parent stops breathing. I didn't cry right away. just sat there holding his hand, which was getting colder, thinking about how small he looked in that bed. How all the force of personality that had defined him was just gone, leaving behind this empty shell. Caleb stood and gently took the hand I was holding, placing it on Dad's chest. Then he pulled me to my feet and into his arms, and that's when I broke. Sobbed into his shirt while he held me, one hand on the back of my head, murmuring things I couldn't hear but understood anyway. We buried him 3 days later on a hill overlooking the ranch. Half the county showed up. People who'd known him, people who owed him money, people who just wanted to pay respects. Richard Pemberton even had the gall to attend, standing in the back with a somber expression that made me want to throw something at him. After everyone left, Caleb and I stayed at the grave. He'd made the marker himself, carving Dad's name and dates into a piece of oak from a tree Dad had planted when I was born. He was a good man, Caleb said. He was a stubborn fool who almost lost everything because he was too proud to ask for help. Yeah, that too. We stood there as the sun set, watching shadows creep across the valley. Finally, Caleb took my hand. Come on, we should get back. The house felt different without Dad in it, quieter, emptier. His chair sat by the window where he'd spent his last good days, and I couldn't bring myself to move it or sit in it or even look at it without feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. Caleb understood. He didn't try to make it better or tell me it would get easier. He just made sure I ate, made sure I slept, made sure the ranch kept running while I figured out how to function in a world where my father didn't exist anymore. 2 weeks after the funeral, I woke up to find Caleb already gone from bed. I went downstairs and found him in the kitchen, papers spread across the table. What are you doing? Planning. He looked up. We need to hire more help. Tommy can't run the whole place by himself, and we need to expand if we're going to make this ranch profitable enough to sustain itself. Expand how? More cattle? Better breeding stock? Maybe some horses. There's a market for working horses that we're not tapping into. He gestured at the papers. I've been running numbers. If we're smart about it, we could double our income in 2 years. I sat down across from him. You've been thinking about this a lot. I've been planning this since before I came back. I just didn't want to push it while your father was alive. But now, he trailed off. Now it's just us, and we get to decide what comes next. What if I don't want to expand? What if I just want to keep things the way they are? Then we keep things the way they are. This is your ranch, Clara. Your decision. Our ranch, I corrected. Our decision. Okay. Our decision. So what do you want? I looked at the papers, charts and lists and plans written in Caleb's neat handwriting. Plans for a future he'd been imagining while I was still stuck in the past. I want to try, I said finally. I want to see what we can build here. Caleb's face broke into a smile. Yeah? Yeah, but we do it together. No more you making plans and asking permission after. We're partners. Partners, he agreed. We spent the rest of the morning going through his plans, refining them, arguing about details. It felt good, normal, like we were actually building something instead of just trying to survive. Over the next few weeks, we hired 2 new ranch hands, young guys named Porter and James, who were willing to work hard for fair wages. We bought 12 new head of cattle from a rancher up north who owed Caleb a favor. We fixed the irrigation system properly instead of just patching it. The ranch started to feel alive again. Purposeful. Like it had a future instead of just a past. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, Caleb and I stopped being 2 people who happened to be married and started being an actual couple. We'd have dinner together and talk about our days. We'd sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sunset. We'd go to bed together and wake up together, and the space between us got smaller every day. One night, about a month after Dad died, I woke to find Caleb sitting by the window, writing. The lamp was turned low, casting shadows across his face. Another letter? I asked quietly. He looked up, startled. Sorry, did I wake you? No, what are you writing? He hesitated, then held up the paper. Last one, I think. Last one? Yeah. I've been writing these things for 15 years. Seemed like it was time to stop. Can I read it? He handed it over. I sat up in bed and angled it toward the lamplight. Letter 48. She's sleeping in our bed. Our bed, not my bed or her bed, but ours. And when I say our ranch now, she doesn't correct me to remind me it's technically hers, because it's not anymore. It's ours. Everything is ours. I don't know how we got here. I know the mechanics of it, the proposal, the marriage, the debts, the crisis, but I don't know how we went from strangers to this. To me sitting here writing while she sleeps 3 feet away, to her kissing me in the kitchen this morning just because she wanted to us planning a future together like it's the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it is natural. Maybe this is what was supposed to happen all along. Maybe I spent 15 years waiting for exactly this. I'm not going to write any more letters after this one. I don't need to anymore. I don't need to preserve her in memory because she's right here. She's real. She's mine. We're building something together, something that started as a business arrangement and became something I don't even have words for yet, something worth the wait. See, I finished reading and looked up. Caleb was watching me, nervous. It's beautiful, I said. It's sappy. It's both. I wanted to mark the end of it. The letters. The waiting. All of it. I climbed out of bed and went to him, taking the letter from my hands and setting it aside. Then I kissed him, slow and deep, trying to pour 15 years' worth of missed opportunities into that one moment. No more waiting, I said against his mouth. No more waiting, he agreed. We made love for the first time that night, slow and fumbling and real. Not the business arrangement we'd signed up for. Not the careful politeness we'd maintained for weeks. Just us, finally letting down the last of the walls we'd built between ourselves. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled like us, Caleb traced patterns on my shoulder with his finger. I love you, he said quietly. I know it's probably too soon to say it. I know we've only been really together for a few weeks. But I've loved you for 15 years and I don't want to wait anymore to tell you. My throat felt tight. You really mean that. Every word. I thought about the letters, the patience, the way he'd sold everything he owned without hesitation, the way he'd held me while I cried over my father, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I love you too, I said. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe when I found the letters. Maybe when you came back covered in mud with that money. Maybe it's been building this whole time and I just didn't recognize it. But it's real. Yeah? Yeah. We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the letter sitting on the windowsill where Caleb had left it. The last letter. The end of one story and the beginning of another. The next morning, I woke to Caleb kissing my shoulder, my neck, working his way up to my mouth. We made love again, slower this time, taking our time to learn each other. We should probably get up, I said eventually. The ranch won't run itself. 5 more minutes. You said that 20 minutes ago. This time I mean it. We finally dragged ourselves out of bed around 8, late by ranch standards. Tommy was already working with Porter and James, all 3 of them giving us knowing looks when we finally appeared. Nice of you to join us, Tommy said, grinning. Shut up, Tommy. Yes, ma'am. We worked through this day, the rhythm of it familiar and comforting. Caleb and I kept catching each other's eyes across the yard, smiling for no reason. It was ridiculous and wonderful and everything I'd never let myself hope for. That evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set, Caleb pulled me close. I have an idea, he said. Good idea or bad idea? Depends on your definition. I want to throw a party. I pulled back to look at him. A party? Yeah, invite everyone who helped us. The Martinez brothers, Davis, Chen, all of them. Have a proper celebration. Show them the ranch is thriving. Thank them for taking a chance on us. That sounds expensive. We have money now. And besides, we owe them. They believed in us when most people thought we were crazy. I thought about it. About all the people who'd contributed to saving the ranch. About the community we'd built without even realizing it. Okay, I said. Let's throw a party. Yeah, but we're not doing it halfway. If we're celebrating, we're doing it right. Caleb laughed and pulled me back against his chest. We sat like that until the stars came out, planning and dreaming and building something that felt like it might actually last. We spent 2 weeks planning the party. Caleb wanted to do it right. Not some thrown-together affair, but a real celebration. We ordered supplies from town, borrowed tables from the church, and convinced Mrs. Halloway to help with the cooking in exchange for bringing her entire extended family. You know this is going to cost a small fortune, I said, looking at the list of supplies. We have a small fortune, might as well use some of it. Caleb was fixing the porch railing, making sure everything looked presentable. Besides, these people saved us. Least we can do is feed them properly. The day before the party, Tommy and the new hands spent hours stringing lanterns between the barn and the house. Porter fell off a ladder twice, and James nearly set himself on fire with the kerosene lamp he was using to test the lights. By evening, the place looked almost magical, dozens of lanterns swaying in the breeze, casting warm pools of light across the yard. I stood on the porch watching them work, and Caleb came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Looks good," he said. "Looks expensive. Stop worrying about money." "I can't help it. I spent 3 years worrying about money. It's become a habit." "Then develop a new habit." He kissed the side of my neck. "Trust me. We're going to be fine." People started arriving around noon the next day. The Martinez brothers came first, bringing their wives and what looked like half a dozen children. Davis showed up with a woman he introduced as his daughter. Chen arrived with enough food to feed an army, insisting it was the least she could do. By mid-afternoon, the yard was full. Ranchers and their families, ranch hands past and present, townspeople who'd helped in small ways we'd almost forgotten. Even Tommy's mother showed up, a tiny woman who immediately started bossing everyone around about where to put things. Sarah Halloway found me in the kitchen, where I was frantically trying to organize the chaos of food preparation. "You're supposed to be enjoying your own party," she said. "I will, once I make sure we don't run out of food." "We're not going to run out of food. There's enough here to feed the whole county twice over." She physically removed the spoon from my hand. "Go, talk to people. Let them see how happy you are." "I'm not." "You are. You're glowing. It's actually disgusting how happy you look." She grinned. "Now go find your husband and stop hiding in here." I found Caleb near the barn, surrounded by a group of ranchers. They were talking about cattle prices and weather patterns and all the things ranchers always talk about. When he saw me approaching, his whole face lit up. "There she is," he said, pulling me against his side. "The real brains behind this operation. Don't listen to him. I just cook and try not to burn the house down." One of the Martinez brothers laughed. "That's more than my wife does. Last week she—" "I can hear you, Miguel," his wife called from across the yard. "That's what I was counting on, mi amor." The laughter was easy and real. People kept coming up to congratulate us, to tell Caleb he'd done well for himself, to tell me I was lucky to have found someone so devoted. A few of the older women made pointed comments about when they could expect to hear about babies, which made me blush and made Caleb grin like an idiot. "Don't encourage them," I muttered after the third such comment. "Why not? It's a fair question." "It's an invasive question." "Is it? Because I've been thinking about it too." I stopped walking and stared at him. "You have?" "Of course I have. Haven't you?" Maybe. Sometimes. I don't know." I felt flustered. "We've only been really married for a few weeks." "We've been legally married for 3 months, and I've been in love with you for 15 years. I think I'm allowed to think about the future." Before I could respond, someone called Caleb's name, and he was pulled into another conversation. I stood there for a moment, my mind spinning. Children. A family. The future stretching out ahead of us in ways I hadn't let myself imagine. The party went on into the evening. Someone brought out a fiddle, and soon there was music and dancing in the yard. Caleb tried to get me to dance, but I refused. "I don't know how." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." "That's your solution to everything. It's worked so far." He pulled me into the makeshift dance area anyway, and we stumbled through something that was probably technically dancing but looked more like organized swaying. People clapped and laughed, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment and joy in equal measure. "See?" Caleb said in my ear. "Not so bad." "We look ridiculous." "We look happy. There's a difference." As the sun set and the lanterns took over, the party shifted into something quieter. People gathered in small groups, talking and laughing. Children ran wild in the darkness, their shrieks of laughter cutting through the adult conversation. Tommy got quietly drunk and started telling increasingly elaborate stories about his adventures as a ranch hand. I was sitting on the porch steps taking a break from the crowd when someone sat down beside me. I turned and found myself looking at Richard Pemberton. Every muscle in my body tensed. "What are you doing here?" "I heard there was a party. Thought I'd pay my respects." "You weren't invited." "No, but I came anyway." He looked out at the crowd, his expression unreadable. Quite a turnout. Seems you and your husband have made a lot of friends. What do you want, Pemberton? To apologize. I laughed, bitter. You're joking. I'm not. What I did, the hidden interest, the impossible deadline, it was wrong. Legal, but wrong. He turned to look at me. I've been doing business like that for 10 years, taking advantage of desperate people, convincing myself it was just smart business. But watching you two fight like you did, watching your husband sell everything he had, he trailed off. It made me think. Think what? That maybe I've become the kind of man I used to despise, the kind who profits from other people's misery. He stood. I'm not expecting forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what happened with you was the last time. I'm done with the hidden clauses and the predatory lending. I'm going to run an honest bank from now on. And I'm supposed to believe that? No, you're supposed to watch and see if I'm telling the truth. And if I'm not, you're supposed to call me out on it. He tipped his hat. Congratulations on your marriage, Mrs. Mercer. I hope it lasts a hell of a lot longer than mine did. He walked away before I could respond, disappearing into the crowd and then into the darkness beyond the lantern light. I sat there trying to process what had just happened. Caleb found me a few minutes later. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Pemberton was just here. What? Caleb's expression darkened. What did he want? To apologize, I think. You think? I told him about the conversation. Caleb listened, his jaw tight, one hand curled into a fist. You believe him? He asked when I finished. I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks he's just setting up another play. Probably the second one. Maybe. But what if he meant it? What if we actually changed something? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then I guess we'll find out. But I'm not trusting him until he proves he's different. And even then, I'm not trusting him much. Fair enough. The party lasted until past midnight. People started leaving in groups, thanking us for the hospitality, making us promise to do it again next year. The Martinez brothers were the last to go, helping us clean up despite our protests. This is what neighbors do, Miguel said firmly. You fed us. We help clean up. It's the law. I don't think that's actually a law, I said. Then it should be. By 1 a.m, it was just me, Caleb, Tommy, and the 2 new hands. We sat on the porch steps, exhausted, looking at the yard full of tables and empty plates and the remnants of celebration. That was a good party, Tommy said, his words slightly slurred. You're drunk, Tommy. Doesn't make it less true. That was a good party. You two did good. We did, didn't we? Caleb leaned back against the porch railing. Makes all the struggle worth it. What struggle? Tommy laughed. You two fell in love and got rich and threw a party. Where's the struggle? There was plenty of struggle before the falling in love part, I said. Was there? Because from where I was standing, you two were meant for each other from day one. Just took you a while to figure it out. After everyone finally went to bed, Caleb and I stayed on the porch. We were too wired to sleep, too full of the energy of the evening to settle down. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, I told him, about the future, about children. Yeah? I think I want that, eventually. Not right now. We're still figuring out how to be married. But someday, I think I'd like to have a family with you. Caleb took my hand, threading his fingers through mine. Someday sounds good. We've got time. Do we? My father died at 52. Your father died young too, didn't he? 48, kicked by a horse. So neither of us comes from long-lived families. Maybe we don't have as much time as we think. Then we'll make the most of what we have. He pulled me closer. But Clara, we don't have to rush. We don't have to plan everything out right now. We can just live. See what happens. I'm not good at that. I like having a plan. I know. But sometimes the best things happen when you stop planning and just let life surprise you. I thought about that. About how every plan I'd ever made had fallen apart. About how the best thing in my life had come from a desperate decision made in a moment of crisis. You might be right, I admitted. Write that down. I want evidence that you said it. I elbowed him in the ribs and he laughed, the sound echoing across the quiet yard. The weeks after the party settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Caleb and I ran the ranch together, making decisions jointly, arguing about details and compromising on solutions. Tommy and the new hands became more than employees. They became friends, people we trusted with the daily operation of the place. The ranch itself started to thrive. The new cattle were healthy and reproducing well. The crops we'd planted came in better than expected. We fixed the irrigation system properly, rebuilt the barn roof, and even started talking about adding another stable for the horses Caleb wanted to raise. Money stopped being the constant worry it had been. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We could afford to pay our workers fairly, keep our equipment maintained, save for the future. It was a revelation after years of barely scraping by. 3 months after the party, I woke up feeling sick. Not terribly sick, just queasy and off. It passed after a few hours, but came back the next morning. And the next. "You should see the doctor," Caleb said, after I spent a week feeling ill every morning. "It's probably just something I ate." "For a week straight? Maybe I'm allergic to your cooking." "I haven't cooked in a week. You've been doing all the meals." "Then maybe I'm allergic to my own cooking." But I went to see the doctor anyway, mostly to stop Caleb from worrying. Dr. Morrison examined me, asked some pointed questions, and then sat back with a knowing smile. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Mercer, about 6 weeks along, I'd say." The world tilted sideways. "I'm what?" "Pregnant. With child. Expecting. However you'd like to phrase it. But I didn't think, we only just, these things happen faster than people expect sometimes." He stood, washing his hands. "You're healthy. The baby seems to be developing normally. Come back in a month and we'll check on progress. And congratulations." I walked out of his office in a daze. Pregnant. I was going to have a baby. Caleb's baby. Our baby. He was waiting outside with the wagon, reading a newspaper. When he saw my face, he immediately jumped down. "What's wrong? What did he say?" "I'm pregnant." Caleb just stared at me. "You're what?" "Pregnant? About 6 weeks. We're having a baby." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then his face split into the biggest smile I'd ever seen, and he picked me up and spun me around right there on the street. "We're having a baby," he shouted to no one in particular. "Caleb, put me down. People are staring. Let them stare. We're having a baby." He set me down but kept his hands on my waist, looking at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. "Are you okay? How do you feel? Do you need to sit down? Should we go home?" "I'm fine. Just nauseous in the mornings. The doctor says it's normal." "Normal, right. Of course it's normal." He was practically vibrating with excitement. "We need to start planning. We need to fix up a room, get supplies, read books about babies. Caleb, breathe. We have 7 months. 7 months isn't that long. There's so much to do." Watching him panic and plan simultaneously made me laugh. This man who'd waited 15 years for me, who'd been patient beyond belief, was now freaking out because we had to wait 7 months for a baby. "We'll figure it out," I said, echoing the words he'd said to me so many times. "Just like we figured out everything else." He calmed down slightly. Yeah, we will." Then the smile came back. "We're having a baby." "You're going to be saying that for the next 7 months, aren't you?" "Probably longer." We drove home in a happy daze, already making plans. Caleb wanted to convert the small room next to ours into a nursery. I wanted to wait until we were further along, just in case. He agreed, but I could tell it was killing him not to start immediately. That night, lying in bed with Caleb's hand on my still flat stomach, I thought about how far we'd come. From a desperate business arrangement to this, a real marriage, a thriving ranch, a baby on the way. It seemed impossible. "You okay?" Caleb asked quietly. "Just thinking about how different things are now. A year ago I was drowning in debt and watching my father die. Now I'm pregnant and happy and terrified and excited all at once." "Sounds about right. I'm terrified too." "You are?" "Completely. I don't know anything about being a father. My own dad died when I was 10. I barely remember what he was like. He was probably stubborn and devoted and willing to do anything for the people he loved, just like you." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You really think I'll be a good father?" "I think you'll be an amazing father. You take care of everyone around you. You work yourself to exhaustion, making sure everyone else is okay. You'll be the same with our kid. Just maybe try not to work yourself into an early grave." "I'll try." The pregnancy progressed normally, though the morning sickness lasted longer than either of us would have liked. Caleb hovered constantly, trying to help with everything until I finally had to order him to back off. I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still do things. I know, I just want to make sure you're okay. I'll be okay as long as you stop treating me like I'm made of glass. He tried to give me space, but I'd catch him watching me with this worried expression, ready to jump in the second I looked like I might need help. It was annoying and endearing in equal measure. As winter approached, we started preparing the nursery despite my earlier reluctance. Caleb built a crib from scratch, spending hours in the barn working on it. Tommy's mother knitted blankets. Sarah Halloway organized something she called a baby shower, which was apparently a new tradition from back east where women gathered to give gifts to expecting mothers. I don't need gifts, I protested. We have money now. We can buy what we need. It's not about need, it's about community. Let people help. Let them be part of this. So I let them. And watching women I'd known my whole life come together to celebrate our baby made me cry, which Sarah assured me was normal. Pregnancy makes you emotional. I cried for an hour once because my husband brought me the wrong kind of apple. That seems extreme. It was a very wrong apple. 6 months into the pregnancy on a cold January morning, I woke to find snow falling. Real snow, not the usual dusting we got in Texas, but actual accumulation. Caleb was already up, standing at the window watching it come down. Haven't seen snow like this in years, he said when he noticed I was awake. I joined him at the window, his arm automatically coming around my shoulders. The ranch looked transformed under the white blanket, peaceful and clean and new. I keep thinking about my father, I said quietly, wishing he could have met his grandchild. He knew, before he died. He knew you were going to be happy. That's what mattered to him. How do you know? Because he told me. That last week, when you went to town for supplies, he said he could die peaceful knowing you'd be taken care of, knowing you'd found someone who loved you. He really said that? Every word. Caleb kissed the top of my head. He was proud of you, of us, of what we'd built. The baby was born on a warm April evening, after 12 hours of labor that felt like 12 years. Dr. Morrison delivered her, a healthy girl with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. She's perfect, Caleb said, tears streaming down his face as he held her for the first time. She's absolutely perfect. She's wrinkled and red and screaming. Perfect, he insisted. We named her Rose, after my mother. Rose Margaret Mercer. She was tiny and fierce and had absolutely no respect for sleep schedules. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and joy and terror that we were doing everything wrong. But we figured it out. Just like we'd figured out everything else. Tommy became her favorite person besides us, making faces to get her to laugh. The new hands were terrified of her, treating her like she might explode if they breathed wrong. Mrs. Halloway showed up weekly with food and advice, most of which was helpful and some of which was completely insane. Put whiskey on her gums when she's teething. I'm not giving whiskey to a baby. Worked for all 7 of mine. That explains a lot about your children, Mrs. Halloway. Life settled into a new rhythm. Early mornings with a crying baby. Days running the ranch while taking turns watching Rose. Evenings as a family on the porch while the sun set. It wasn't always easy. Rose was colicky, and Caleb and I were both sleep-deprived, and sometimes we snapped at each other over stupid things. But we worked through it. We apologized when we were wrong. We helped when the other was struggling. We took turns getting up in the middle of the night. We were a team. One evening, when Rose was 6 months old, I found Caleb in the nursery, rocking her to sleep and singing quietly. I stood in the doorway watching them. This man who'd waited so long for me now singing lullabies to our daughter. He noticed me and smiled. She's almost out. You're good at that. I've had practice. 6 months of practice. I came and sat beside the rocking chair. Rose was drowsy, her eyes half closed, one tiny hand wrapped around Caleb's finger. Do you ever regret it? I asked quietly. Selling everything you had? Coming back here? Caleb looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Are you serious? I'm just asking. You gave up a lot. Your business, your independence, your whole life up north. I gave up a business to gain a family. I gave up independence to gain partnership. I gave up a life I was living alone to build a life with you. He looked down at Rose, now fully asleep. No, I don't regret it. Not for a second. Even when I'm cranky because I haven't slept in 3 days, even then. Even when the ranch is struggling and money's tight, even then, though money's not that tight anymore. You know what I mean? I do, and my answer doesn't change. This, you, Rose, the ranch, everything we've built, this is what I wanted. What I've always wanted. I just didn't know how to get here until your father gave me the chance. I leaned my head against his shoulder, watching our daughter sleep. I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I know. You show me every day. How? By building this life with me, by trusting me, by letting me be here for you and for her. He shifted Rose in his arms, preparing to put her down in the crib. Love isn't just words, Clara. It's actions. It's choices. And you choose me every day. That's more than enough. We put Rose down together, both of us holding our breath as we transferred her to the crib, waiting to see if she'd wake up. She didn't. We tiptoed out of the room like we were defusing a bomb. In our room, we collapsed onto the bed, exhausted. Remember when we had energy? I asked. Vaguely, it was nice. Remember when we slept through the night? That was definitely nice. Remember when we thought taking care of a ranch was hard? Caleb laughed. Ranch work is nothing compared to taking care of a tiny human. At least cattle don't require you to change their diapers. We lay there in comfortable silence. Outside, I could hear Tommy and the hands finishing up for the day, their voices carrying across the yard. The ranch was doing well, better than well. We'd expanded the herd, bought more land, even hired another hand to help with the increased work. I was thinking, Caleb said after a while, dangerous. Maybe we should throw another party. Celebrate Rose's first birthday when it comes. Let everyone see how much she's grown. That's months away. I like to plan ahead. Since when? You're the one who told me to stop planning and just live. I'm allowed to change my mind. Fair point. We started planning the party right then and there, lying in bed in the darkness, throwing out ideas and building on each other's suggestions. It was easy and natural, this partnership we'd built. We knew how to work together now, how to complement each other's strengths and compensate for each other's weaknesses. The party happened in July, on a day so hot the air shimmered. We set up in the shade near the house, with tables of food and drinks, and a small cake Mrs. Halloway had made that Rose immediately destroyed with her hands. Everyone who'd helped us showed up, the Martinez brothers with their growing families, Davis with his daughter who was now engaged, Chen with her new business partner. Even Richard Pemberton came, though he stayed on the outskirts and left early. I still don't trust him, Caleb said, watching him go. Me neither, but he hasn't caused any trouble in over a year. Maybe he really did change. Or maybe he's just waiting for the right opportunity. Either way, we're stronger now. We can handle whatever comes. Caleb looked at me, then at Rose, who was covered head to toe in cake and loving every minute of it. Yeah, we can. As the sun set and the lanterns came on, the same ones we'd used for our first party, I found myself on the porch steps again, taking it all in. The people, the laughter, the sense of community we'd built. Tommy trying to teach Rose to clap. Sarah Halloway arguing good-naturedly with her mother about the proper way to make pie crust. Caleb in the center of it all, talking and laughing and belonging in a way he probably never had anywhere else. This was what love looked like, I realized. Not the dramatic gestures or the grand declarations, but this, the daily choice to build something together, the willingness to sacrifice for each other, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the courage to fight when that moment came. Caleb had waited 15 years for me, had written letters to someone who didn't know he existed, had kept that flame alive through everything else in his life. And when the opportunity finally came, he hadn't hesitated. He'd risked everything on the chance that we might build something real. And we had. We'd taken a desperate business arrangement and turned it into a marriage, a family, a life. He found me on the steps, sat down beside me with Rose in his arms. She was getting sleepy, her head drooping against his chest. Good party, he said. You say that about every party we throw. Because it's true every time. I leaned against him, the three of us sitting there as the celebration continued around us. Rose fell asleep, her breathing evening out. Caleb held her carefully, protectively, like she was the most precious thing in the world. And maybe she was. Maybe this whole thing, the ranch, the marriage, the family, was precious exactly because it had been hard won, because we'd fought for it, because it hadn't been handed to us but built piece by piece through work and sacrifice and stubborn determination. I'm glad you came back, I said quietly. Me too. Even though I was terrible to you at first? You weren't terrible. You were scared. There's a difference. I barely talked to you for 3 weeks. I can be patient. 15 years patient, apparently. He smiled. Whatever it takes. That became our motto in the years that followed. Whatever it takes. When the droughts came and we had to haul water from miles away. When Rose got sick and we spent 3 days thinking we might lose her. When cattle prices dropped and we had to get creative about making ends meet. When a second baby came, a boy we named Thomas after my father, and we had to figure out how to handle 2 children on top of everything else. Whatever it takes. We said it to each other in the hard moments, the scary moments, the moments when giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. And we meant it. Because what we'd built was worth fighting for. The ranch prospered. Our family grew. 2 more children after Thomas, both girls, both stubborn and fierce, like their mother, according to Caleb. The community around us thrived, ranchers helping ranchers, people looking out for each other in ways that hadn't happened before. And through it all, Caleb and I grew together instead of apart. We figured out how to fight fair, how to apologize, how to forgive. We learned each other's rhythms and needs and fears. We became partners in the truest sense. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, I'd think about those letters. About the lonely boy who'd watched me by the creek and written his heart out to someone who didn't know he existed. About the patient man who'd waited years for a chance that might never come. I kept the letters in a box in our closet. Sometimes I'd take them out and read them, remembering the journey that brought us here. Caleb caught me once, sitting on the floor with letters spread around me. Still reading those? He asked. Sometimes. They remind me. Of what? Of how lucky we are. How easily this could have gone differently, if you hadn't come back, if I hadn't agreed to the marriage, if we hadn't found a way through all the obstacles. Luck had nothing to do with it. We fought for this. You fought for this? For 15 years. And you fought for it when it mattered. When Pemberton came after us. When your father was dying. When we had to decide if we were going to make this marriage real or just keep pretending. He sat down beside me on the floor. We both fought. That's why it worked. Years passed. The children grew. The ranch expanded. We weathered storms and droughts and market crashes and personal losses. Through it all, we held on to each other and to the life we'd built. On our 20th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised me by taking me back to the creek where he'd first seen me all those years ago. It looked the same, the water moving slowly, the trees providing shade, the quiet peace of it. This is where it started, he said. For me, anyway. I was 16, reading some book I've completely forgotten now. You were beautiful. You are beautiful. That part hasn't changed. I have gray hair and wrinkles and 4 children worth of stretch marks. Still beautiful, more beautiful actually, because now I know you. Not just the girl by the creek, but the woman you became. The fighter, the mother, the partner. We sat by that creek for hours, talking about everything and nothing, about the children and their futures, about the ranch and where we wanted it to go, about dreams we still had and dreams we'd already achieved. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't come back? I asked. No, because this is the only life I wanted, the only one that mattered. You can't know that for sure. Maybe you would have met someone else, built something different. Maybe. But it wouldn't have been this. Wouldn't have been you. He took my hand. I spent 15 years waiting for a chance at this life. I'm not going to waste time wondering about alternate versions that don't exist. That was Caleb, practical and devoted in equal measure. He'd made his choice and never looked back, never regretted, never wondered about what-ifs. And maybe that was the real lesson in all of this. Not that love conquers all, or that patience is rewarded, or any of those simple truths that don't hold up under pressure. But that sometimes you have to take a chance on something uncertain. That sometimes the best things come from desperate choices made in impossible situations. That sometimes you have to fight for what you want instead of waiting for it to be handed to you. Caleb had fought for me for 15 years. I'd fought for us when it mattered most. Together, we'd built something that lasted. As we walked back to the ranch that evening, hand in hand, I thought about the tin box hidden in the barn all those years ago. about the letters written by a boy who loved someone from a distance, about patience and persistence and the courage to take a chance when the moment finally came. Our oldest daughter met us at the house, holding her youngest sister who was crying about something. She won't stop. I don't know what's wrong. I took the baby, settled her against my hip, and she immediately stopped crying. Just needed her mother. Sometimes the solution was that simple. Magic touch, Caleb said, smiling. 20 years of practice. 20 years, he repeated. Doesn't seem like that long. That's because we spent most of it working too hard to notice time passing. Probably, but I wouldn't change it. Neither would I. And that was the truth. For all the struggle, all the fear, all the moments when we didn't think we'd make it, I wouldn't change any of it. Because it led here, to this life, to this family, to this man who'd loved me long before I knew how to love him back. That night, after the children were in bed and the ranch was quiet, Caleb and I sat on the porch like we had so many times before. The stars were out, bright and clear in the Texas sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Caleb asked. "What?" "That last letter I wrote. The one where I said I was done writing them." "I remember. You said you didn't need to preserve me in memory anymore because I was real." "Right, but I was wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "I said it was the end of the story, but it wasn't. It was just the end of the waiting. The actual story, our story, that was just beginning. And now? Now we're in the middle of it, the good part, where we get to see how it all turns out." I leaned against him, comfortable and content. "I think it's turning out pretty well." "Yeah, me too." We sat there in the darkness, two people who'd found each other the long way around, who'd built a life together piece by piece, who'd learned that love wasn't just about grand gestures, but about daily choices, about showing up, about fighting for what mattered. The ranch would continue. The children would grow and have lives of their own. Time would pass and things would change. But this, the foundation we'd built, the partnership we'd forged, the family we'd created, this would last. Because we'd fought for it, we'd chosen it, every single day. And that made all the difference.